Welcome back. Tensions are escalating between the United States and Venezuela, with Washington tightening sanctions, intercepting oil tankers and increasing its military presence in the Caribbean. The U.S. says it's targeting drug trafficking, while Venezuela calls it a blockade and a threat to regional stability. A dispute now playing out at the United Nations. Well, to help us understand where this crisis is heading and what it could mean for the region and beyond, I'm now joined by Peter NICOLL, Managing Partner of Counter Risk Consultancy Malaysia, Sdn Bhd. Hi Pete, it's good to speak to you and thanks for making time for us at a very busy time of the year as well. But for viewers who may not be following closely, how would you describe the current state of the US-Venezuela relations at this point of time? Is this really a full-blown crisis, or is it a slow burn standoff?
Hi, good afternoon, Jesse. It's good to be with you again, and thanks for the invitation. The current state of US-Venezuela relations really can be characterized as a complex standoff rather than a full-blown crisis at the moment. So while tensions remain high, particularly due to issues like human rights violations in Venezuela, economic sanctions imposed by the US, and the political legitimacy of the Maduro regime, the situation has evolved into a very much prolonged diplomatic standoff. The US has applied various sanctions aimed at pressuring the Maduro government, which it considers illegitimate following the 2018 presidential elections. In contrast, of course, Venezuela has sought to strengthen its alliances with countries such as Russia and China in response to those US policies. So while there are intermittent escalations, such as the military threats and rhetoric, the situation primarily reflects a very slow burn standoff, with both sides remaining very much entrenched in their positions. This ongoing dynamic is marked by persistent political division within Venezuela and among its allies, making resolution to this problem in the near term very challenging. Thus, it remains very crucial, I think, for observers to monitor developments in diplomatic dialogue and, of course, the shifts in international alliances as we go forward, Jesse.
Yeah, I hear that, Pete, but the US says it's targeting drug trafficking, and Venezuela claims it's facing a blockade and regime change pressure. So why do both sides, or why are they both interpreting the same actions so differently? Does the US have a so-called right over this issue? Help us understand that better.
Yeah, the issue here is that Venezuela is not a major producer of narcotics. It is a transit point, but its neighbor, Colombia, is. So there is an issue here about the validity of the US allegations. Also, that a lot of the craft that the US have been striking off the coast of Venezuela and in the Caribbean, those vessels do not have the ability to actually reach the US. So that has also raised a lot of concerns and alarms about the rhetoric and about the policy from the US. What's important is the differing interpretations of actions between the US and Venezuela. And these stem from contrasting political narratives, interests, and historical context. I mean, there is the political narrative where the US government frames its actions against Venezuela as part of a broader strategy to combat drug trafficking, as you said, and to support democracy. But in contrast, the Venezuelan government portrays these actions as a form of imperialistic aggression, aiming to destabilize the country and affect regime change. So this narrative from Venezuela seems to consolidate domestic support and international support about sovereignty and integrity. There's also interest in values. The US has strategic interests in the region, including combating drug trafficking. Venezuela, on the other hand, prioritizes sovereignty and views the US sanctions and interventions as direct threats. And there is historical context as well. There are historical grievances, particularly from the Cold War era and US involvement in Latin America. So these divergent viewpoints, Jesse, create a complex dynamic where both sides react based on their own narratives and strategic interests, and this leads to misunderstanding and conflict rather than dialogue. So what we're looking for is effective communication and recognition of each other's narratives, which will be essential for any potential resolution, Jesse.
Well, at this point, Pete, the US has told the United Nations it will enforce sanctions to what they say is the maximum extent. That is to deprive President Maduro of resources. Meanwhile, Russia has warned that other Latin American countries could be next in line. So, how serious is this escalation at the UN level? And what does it signal about the US's intentions in the region?
Well, whilst the UN may well issue declarations requesting a de escalation, it's unlikely they will do very much more. And even resolutions brought before it by Venezuela are not likely to see any direct involvement of the United Nations itself. The US, of course, has consistently ignored any UN directives. So a diplomatic end is likely to be the only outcome. It has to come between both parties rather than through the UN. The US policy is very difficult to judge and predict as the president actually sort of changes his mind almost on a daily basis about who is a friend and who is not, whether it's going to be aggressive action or diplomatic and negotiation action. So I think that basically they have this historical context, they have interests in the region, and I think that's what's driving Trump at the moment with this, not only Venezuela, but we're likely to see it in other Latin American countries as well, Jesse.
Pete, where we are now is that we're seeing coordinated reactions from China, from Russia, Iran, Mexico, and even Brazil. They're all warning against escalation and calling for UN involvement. How does these responses then shape the diplomatic landscape and influence US's decision in terms of their next steps?
We would consider it unlikely that any pressure from outside will change Trump's foreign policy because it appears to be one of confrontation. And he's not been seen to react to any kind of international response from ongoing foreign issues from other governments. Trump seems to be promoting a foreign policy of aggressive nature. And although the rhetoric is not often backed up with military threat, the situation in Venezuela has indeed actually seen the US deploy a significantly large naval flotilla close to Venezuela. Um, Perhaps Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin in Russia may have some impact here, as Putin seems to be able to have some influence over him. And Putin telling Trump to back off from Venezuela is a real possibility, and he may listen to that. But it's very unpredictable, and foreign policy in the US is an absolute mess. We never know from one day to the next what it's going to be, Jesse.
Okay, but Venezuela is a major oil producer. Could this dispute disrupt global energy supplies or even influence fuel prices, even for countries that are far from the region, like, for example, us here in the Asian region?
We don't think it will impact. Whilst Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, its production is considerably low. However, any military intervention by the US would have a real impact on global oil prices, and it would depend on how much is available, how much is released that will actually drive that price. And the markets will be very sensitive to any type of military escalation. So that's, I think, the key to it. Is not the ongoing situation. It would be if there is military intervention. That's when we'd have to really watch what's going on, Jesse.
Mhm. But what's happened in Venezuela is that their National Assembly, they have passed a law criminalizing what it calls piracy and blockades following the US's seizure of oil vessels. Could this domestic legislation then have a wider international or regional implication, particularly for third world countries or third countries whose vessels or ports are involved in this ecosystem?
Um, yes, it could. Um, the ICLOS, the international law relating to the sea, makes it quite clear that what the US has done is in fact illegal, is in fact, according to law, an act of piracy. Um, how far the US takes this, I mean, they're pursuing three other oil tankers at the moment. The one that they seized about 3 days ago isn't on a list that the US said is a banned vessel. which is carrying illegal oil. So countries who may support the US could see action taken against their vessels by Venezuela. But we must remember that with Venezuela's economy in real turmoil, they have a huge unemployment rate. Their export and import rates are really poor. The country is actually collapsing. It's going to be considered unlikely that their government would take any action against foreign countries, as they really do need the support of the international community, and they need their trade in this particular confrontation, Jesse.
Pete, thanks for giving us a clearer picture and sort of untangling this issue for a better understanding as well. We'll speak to you very soon, Pete. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Jesse.